Okay friends, one of the first things we have to do is safely raise and support the rear of the truck, and then of course we're going to remove all of our lug nuts and then the wheel. Do is go ahead and remove our caliper to caliper slider bolts. There's going to be 2 of them. We need to get them both out of there. Remove your caliper. Get this off of there. Now you're going to want to inspect your caliper. If you see any fluid that looks like it's coming out of this boot right here, that means that you have to replace your caliper. As you can tell, this one's been leaking for a while. It needs to be replaced. Let's go ahead and get these pads out of here. There we are. Now the next thing we need to do is remove our caliper bracket bolts. Now the next thing we're going to do is take one of our lug nuts and start it onto one of the lug studs. After you've done that, let's continue on by removing the rotor. Okay, now the next thing we're going to want to do is go ahead and clean down our mating surface of our axle, so that way there when we put on the rotor, it'll sit flush. Okay friends, now the next thing we need to do is go ahead and clean down our rotor braking surfaces. We'll do the front. Then of course turn it over. We'll do along this braking surface. And then of course inside this area where the parking brake shoes are going to ride. Let's go ahead and use a little bit of copper never seize along this area here. Now we need to take a look right down here to the emergency brake adjuster. This is something that we're going to have to adjust to make sure that the e-brake shoe is close enough to the rotor without actually necessarily touching it. And give it a nice little turn like this. Now at this point, we're just going to listen for a little bit of friction. I don't really hear anything, so that means that my shoes need to be adjusted out a little bit. So for the driver's side, I'm just going to go ahead and grab onto this, and I'm going to turn it clockwise. That's going to end up pushing out the shoe a little bit, so let's go ahead and grab the rotor and try again. Now at this point, I can hear a tiny bit of drag, but I definitely don't feel any resistance on the rotor. If you hear drag and you have resistance, then that means that you're a little bit too tight. Now that we have the rotor on, you're going to of course want to take off these tins and clean up the area underneath the tins. All underneath there needs to be nice and smooth so there's no buildup. Aside from that, you have your caliper sliders as well. You want to make sure that those are nice and free and clear. If you were to just go ahead and slide it out and remove it, you can tell that this one's in very poor condition. For us personally, we're going to go ahead and replace the caliper, but I'll show you how to take care of this anyways. Okay friends, now it's time to prep our new caliper. To do that, obviously we want to take off our caliper slider bolts. There's 2 of them. I'm going to make sure that I hold the caliper slider so it can't spin, and then we'll remove the bolt. Remove the bolts, set those aside, remove the caliper from the bracket. Now that that's apart, let's continue on to grabbing our sliders. We'll go ahead and remove them. Now remove those boots. Let's go ahead and straighten those out. I'm going to go right inside this port right here. Go ahead and put a good amount of lubricant right on there, on the inside, and then I'm going to get along that outer lip as well. You don't need to get all the way around the lip, because I'll show you in a second why. Now let's go ahead and lubricate our caliper slider. Get along the entire shaft of it, and then down along this ridge right along here. That's going to be the area where your boot's going to ride. Now let's go ahead and take our caliper slider boot. I'm going to put it right onto the caliper bracket here, and give it a nice spin. That's going to help ensure that the grease makes its way around the entire channel. Let's go ahead and slide in our slider. Push it all the way in till it bottoms out, and then give that a nice spin as well. Do the same to both. Alright, next let's continue with our caliper grease, and we're going to go right along our 4 corners, right along here. This is where your caliper tins are going to be. After you have it completely lubricated, let's continue on by putting on our tins. I'm just going to line it up just like this, and press it right in. Down along this area here, you want to give that a nice squeeze just to ensure that it's completely locked in. Do the same to both. Use a little bit of that caliper grease. We're going to go right along the piston here, essentially just on the mating surfaces where the caliper is going to touch up against the pads. Right along the piston, and then both of these ears. Now let's go ahead and turn that caliper, and we're going to put on our tin. You're going to notice that you have a little tab right here. We're going to put that tab facing towards the piston, right up along this area right here. Now I'm just going to go ahead and carefully push this down and lock it in. There we are. Now back over at the truck, let's continue by putting on our caliper bracket with our caliper bracket bolts. I always like to use a little bit of red thread locker on these. We'll go ahead and snug them up, and then we'll torque them to 52 foot-pounds. Okay, now it's going to be time to put on our brake pads. What you're going to notice is you have wear indicators on them. We want to essentially line these up so we have the wear indicators both facing on the same side here. Let's put the top area in, line up the bottom, and put that in as well. You should feel these be able to flow nicely. Do the same for the outer pad. That feels good. Now let's take our caliper, slide it right over those pads, push in on the sliders so we can slide the caliper over it, and then of course we'll put on our slider bolts with a little bit of red thread locker. Okay, now let's go ahead and snug them up and torque them to 23 foot-pounds. I'm going to hold the slider so it doesn't spin and snug it up. Let's go ahead and get the wheel up on here, hopefully. Start on all of our lug nuts, we'll snug them up, and then we'll get it on the ground and torque them to 100 foot-pounds. Torqued. Of course, if you have your lug nut covers, let's go ahead and make sure we put those on as well. There we are. Now all you have left to do is go ahead and pump up the brake pedal, check your master cylinder for your brake fluid, and of course, take it for a road test.